Dear friends of Volumetric Trading, welcome from Eduardo Buratini to this analysis video on the American indices for July 22nd. So, we're in a very particular situation because in yesterday's session, we basically witnessed, first of all, the creation of new all-time highs by both the S&P and the NASDAQ. And now we'll take a look at the indices one by one, starting with the S&P and then making the same considerations for the NASDAQ. We saw the creation of new all-time highs, specifically at 6,374, and this culminated, let's say, with a rather significant volume dynamic because not only was there an absorption of buyers right at the creation of this high, in fact, we could even call it a triple top, okay? Give or take a tick, it's not exactly a geometric triple top, let's say, but the market tried 3 times to break through this level and not only failed, but also generated a rather significant absorption to the detriment of the buyers. So basically, there was a lot of buying strength, aggressive buying, of course, that still wasn't able to push the price any higher. So this is a classic example of effort without result. And all of this also culminated in a volume profile dynamic, which doesn't show up that often, but when it does, it's definitely something to take seriously, because it's basically absorption seen from an intraday perspective as well. If we look at this volume profile on the right side of my screen, you can see that, well, the market went up, created a distribution, and shifted the POC directly into this area. Here we're still talking about yesterday's session, okay? After the POC moved into this area, the market started. Well, it rejected this whole area, then began to redistribute in the lower part, creating a distribution that was definitely irregular. But, we can say without a shadow of a doubt that it rebalanced pretty much all of what had been the previous, let's say, upward volume distribution. And this is definitely a pretty significant sign of rejection, okay? Especially if it happens, let's say, towards the end of the session. Here, you can see this was a more significant absorption that formed around 7 o'clock, so in the final part of the session. So this leads us to think that it's definitely a market that opened really well. It opened with great strength, especially considering that basically this entire bullish spike basically started right from the opening of the gap on Sunday evening. And in doing exactly this, even the 60 range chart signaled an absorption of sellers this time. So let's say it was a continuous. It was a continuation of trading above what were even the most important levels of value area of the week that just ended to create this situation. However, it did encounter some resistance. But it's still a market that's coming from a particularly strong momentum, which by now has been more than proven both from a price perspective and from a volume perspective. Last night's close happened around 6,350, so right near what, from a volume profile, from a daily market profile perspective, are fairly significant levels. Technically, in this area, we could see a rebound already in the first part of today's European session. However, the level that in my opinion really deserves attention is this area a bit further down. Specifically, this whole area between about 6,325 and 6,330. This will be the line in the sand for today, meaning the main support level. If this level were to be lost, we could definitely see a larger retracement, which would then create a sort of continuation. let's say a continuation of weakness compared to this initial sign of weakness that appeared right when there was an attempt to create new all-time highs. Okay, so generally speaking, the most important support levels for the day are the whole area between 6,330 and about 6,325, where you can also see home. The area is clearly marked by other levels of interest from the Volumetric, our tool that reads, let's say, order flow dynamics algorithmically and connects them with price action. So, this is definitely not just a support level. It's really a line in the sand because if it gets breached, then a much broader retracement could be triggered. So this is definitely the area that should be given the most attention during the session. Let's also take a look at the NASDAQ. Generally speaking, the NASDAQ has created a structure that is absolutely comparable both in type and in timing. Here too we saw absorption, generated in exactly the same way as on the S&P 500, already in the area of the Sunday night, open, and here as well we had significant acceptance in the upper part of the day, with the creation of the exact same absorption dynamic. A very small difference. On the NASDAQ, the dynamic was much stronger in terms of volume, just as the movement that created this dynamic was also stronger, because we can see that the NASDAQ definitely created a much broader distribution. In fact, we can say that it created a much wider intraday range, again during yesterday's session. The NASDAQ also went on to distribute in the upper part of the day. Here there was a bit more of a battle, however, around the POC, which also shifted during yesterday's session. However, it wasn't, let's say, as violent a rejection on the POC as we saw on the S&P. Instead, there was a bit of distribution formed. Here too we have here it's basically more of a double top, okay? Here it was basically just a single, the end of a completely bullish swing. So for sure here we have some persistence, a bit less persistence, but the absorption dynamic that developed is definitely stronger because we had the same signal generated by two different time frames. So, MH, also while on the S&P, it was mainly an intraday signal. Here it also has a bit more of a swing significance. So, MMH, the NASDAQ showed greater weakness, and at the close of yesterday's session, it also had a stronger reaction because we can see that here we already ended up directly below what was the VWAP of the session itself. For sure here we have a slightly broader context in terms of range, because technically the same level that, MMH, we were able to consider on the S&P around the 6,330 area. Here we definitely have it shifted a bit further south. Ideally, the reference area is around 23,200, but in my opinion, on the NASDAQ you also need to pay close attention to exactly where we are right now. Because technically, this is a low volume area that basically separates the slightly larger distribution zone that formed during yesterday's session from the immediately lower distribution zone. Even here, it could already provide important information in today's session because technically this should be, or rather, could already be, the first level of some support strength, but definitely a weaker strength compared to the one down here at 23,200. From which we might see the price bounce back, maybe settle, let's say, around the -1 deviation of the weekly VWAP, and then come back to retest at least the higher volume nodes a bit further up, okay? But let's not forget that A reaction like this will probably tend to be maintained during the European session, so levels to keep an eye on, though less important, are 23,300 and definitely more important are 23,220 and 23,200. And, well, this 23,200 level is definitely made even more important by the delta profile, which clearly highlights this absorption that is already indicated by the vol analyzer as well. Let's say both in terms of volume histograms and the delta left behind. So we can really understand the significance of this absorption, and it's definitely the main factor supporting the entire swing. Therefore, the descending line for the Nasdaq is definitely positioned around 23,200, a level that absolutely needs to be monitored in today's session, because it's precisely the level where the difference could be made between a market that simply comes back for a retest, just pulls back to gather momentum to test a strength it has already shown and possibly continue. Or, if these levels are lost, in that case, it could signal a possible deeper retracement, a potential reversal situation. Clearly, we'll have to see how things play out in real time. Obviously, I want to remind everyone that these analyses are meant solely for educational and training purposes and should not in any way be considered as trading signals or investment advice, nor as an encouragement to take a position. Thank you all for your attention, and I wish you a great day and good trading.